Right. Welcome everyone to our virtual program today, California Native Plants. I'm Sariana, the Adult Services Librarian at the San Anselmo Library. And before we begin, I'd like to thank the Friends of the Library and the Library Parcel Tax for sponsoring this program and all of our library programs. Everyone will remain muted until the end of the presentation. If you have a question, please type it into the chat box and we will answer all questions at the end of the presentation. Technology can be very fickle, and I want to thank you all in advance for your patience and understanding during this program. We are recording the program today, and I will send the link out later today or early tomorrow. Our speaker today is Marie Narlock. Marie has been a UC Marin Master Gardener since 2004. She studied landscape design through the UC Berkeley Extension and Merritt College and completed sustainable landscape classes at Sonoma State. She writes articles for the Marin IJ and is editor of The Leaflet, the UC Marin Master Gardener e-newsletter. Marie has designed demonstration gardens for the Marin County Fair over the years, and she co-designed and managed the Marin Ventures Garden that serves developmentally disabled adults. Please join me in welcoming Marie Narlock. Yay! I'm the only one not muted. We're all clapping for you, Marie.
Oh, that's so sweet. Thank you, Sariana. That's actually lovely. So I'm just so happy to be here and to be talking about native plants. Our beautiful plants are all around us. And so I think I will just launch right in and show you some pretty pictures, and we'll talk about natives. So here we go. Okay. Here we go. First one who we are slide, the Marin Master Gardeners. Our primary goal is to answer questions and provide research-based information on home horticulture, pest management, and sustainable landscape practices. So let's talk about what we're going to cover today. So first thing is we'll talk about what a native plant is. We'll talk about why they matter and where they are. And I'll also make some suggestions for native plants to grow in your own garden. And we'll talk about how to care for them and where to learn more. So let's start with, what is a native plant? They have a couple of things in common. What's going on here? The first thing is that our native plants co-evolved over a very long period of time with animals, fungi, bacteria, microbes, birds and ants and all sorts of creatures over a very long period of time, hundreds and in many cases, thousands of years. They grew in California long before the Europeans arrived. And we'll talk about what happened when the Europeans arrived in a minute. But the first Californians depended on our native plants for food, for their livelihoods, for medicine, shelter, all sorts of things. And so importantly, they are the foundation of our native ecosystems. So all the creatures I was mentioning earlier, birds, bees, etc., they depend on that combination of our native flora for their survival. Without some of these plants, all of these other creatures wouldn't exist. So this is a photo of what we like to think, and it's a beautiful photo of sort of the rolling hills in Marin. Nice and green in winter and spring, really gorgeous. The truth of the matter is that most of what we're seeing there, all of that green, are really exotic weeds. That's what we call them. There are native plants and there are exotics. And all of exotic means is that it's not native. But one can only imagine what that looked like after our ancestors, the missionaries and Europeans arrived and brought their grazing animals and their seeds and so forth, that sort of snuffed out a lot of our natives. And, here are some of examples, right, of places around California where the hillsides really light up with wildflowers in the spring, and perhaps that's what we would see. So it's just kind of an interesting thing to think about. So here are some plant facts about natives. California has more plant species than any other state by far, I'll add. And of our 8,000 native plants, 1,000 of them grow in Marin. 40% of California's plants are grown nowhere else on Earth. And that's a pretty amazing statistic to me. And many of them have fascinating traits that help them accommodate our dry conditions. And as I'm sure most of you are aware, we live in a Mediterranean climate where we know the routine, very long, dry summers. And hopefully we hope for rain in winter. So that's what characterizes Mediterranean climates. So let's look real briefly at some of these adaptations that native plants have developed to let them live with especially these low water situations in summer. And they really boil down to their leaves and their roots. Many of them have little hairs on the undersides of their leaves, and it offers some insulation from heat. Many have small, tough, leathery leaves, and this helps reduce evaporation. Often they're gray, the foliage is gray, and this deflects the sun. They're often held vertically, like in this photo. You see how the leaves are held very upright. This happens to be a manzanita, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And that also reduces exposure to the sun. Some of the leaves curl up in hot weather to reduce some exposure. And sometimes they will grow large leaves in wet months to grab as much water as they can. And then in summer, when it's hot, they'll just grow tiny little leaves to conserve. Plants are pretty smart. Some drought deciduous plants will drop their leaves during the dry season, sort of to save themselves until the next rain comes. And finally, some native plants, think about, say, like oak trees, they have shallow roots to take advantage of early winter rains, and extremely deep roots that allow them to go down and access groundwater. So they're pretty smart. So, few reasons to grow native plants. One of the big ones is that they really encourage sustainability, right? We refer to them as a cornerstone of an earth-friendly garden. In other words, leaving as little of an imprint as we can on the earth. They help us conserve water because many prefer little or no water once they're established. They're low maintenance because they're naturally acclimated to our climate, soil, insects, etc. There are no chemicals needed, and many of them have developed their own defenses. And we're going to watch a video in a little bit that highlights one of those, which is kind of cool. And because of all of these things, they help mitigate climate change because we don't have to produce chemicals for fertilizers and so forth. We use less water, which uses a lot of electricity, moving water around in the state. And one of my favorite reasons is because it creates a sense of place, right? When we go on hikes, all around us in Marin County and throughout the state, this is the look of California, right? These plants. And they protect our precious biodiversity. We're going to talk about that word for 1 minute. Biodiversity is the variety of living things that naturally coexist in a specific area, right? So every area is unique, and each species, whether it's underground or it's a plant or it's a bird, whatever it is, each species in an ecosystem plays a role. And I want to stress it's even the ones you can only see with a microscope, right? It's those little tiny critters. Everything plays a role in our for biodiversity. And our blend of native plants and all of these living things it's our ecosystem only exists here. It's like our thumbprint. And that's the reason why our native plants are just so incredibly critical. So we are the most biodiverse state in the country, and we are among the most biodiverse regions in the world, but there are definitely some threats on the horizon. Right now, 30% of our native species, plants and otherwise, are threatened with extinction. One of the primary reasons for that is habitat loss, right? So anytime we put down a parking lot or a house or all the things that we know we need, but whenever we do that, we're taking a chink out of space for these creatures to exist. And in the next 100 years, climate change is expected to shrink the range of of California's endemic plants by up to 80%. Endemic plants are plants that only grow in a certain area. So, and we have some of those in Marin plants that only grow here. So these are concerns, and this is why by putting them in our gardens, it can help. So, like people, native plants live in communities. And we're going to look at just a snapshot of 3 plant communities in Marin, and they'll be familiar to you. So the coastal sage scrub. This is the most common plant community in Marin. It's very diverse. This is the cooler areas, right? This is down in Sausalito and areas of Mill Valley and out along the coastline in West Marin, and inland a little bit in West Marin. You can see there's just some gorgeous plants there. They're adapted to long, dry spells and also fog in summer. They need well-drained soil and some sunshine. There are no trees in the coastal sage scrub. They just, they like this full exposure. Some of them, down here on the left, this blue Xianothus is blooming right now. In fact, you can see it's so beautiful. And some of the currants or the ribes, this yellow plant is quite beautiful. The Manzanitas up here, it's a beautiful plant community. Next, we'll look at the, the central oak woodland. And these are in the drier areas of Marin, like say on Mount Bredell and so forth. Understory of grasses and perennials. This was a predominant plant community years ago. And now it's really been replaced by those weeds that we looked at in the picture with the beautiful green, sort of terrain. Of course, the king and the queen is the oak tree here. You can't say enough good things about oak trees. We'll be talking about them in a minute. These are the buckeyes. They're awfully beautiful. The sticky monkey flowers, which you can see on walks, and toyon is also another beautiful native plant. So a really, really beautiful picture of California there. And this other one we'll look at are the mixed evergreen forests, riparian, which means near water. And how lucky are we to live in an area where, we have redwood groves, and we can see these thick layers of mulch that they drop. That's called duff, when the redwood trees drop their needles. These areas tend to be damp year round. They often have streams or creeks near them. These plants often like a little bit of partial shade, right? Because they're in the forest. And so they're used to that sort of dappled light. So some standouts here, like this is up in the upper left, columbine, lovely plant, of course, redwoods. And the leopard lily over here in the upper right is such a cool plant, just absolutely striking. And the native Douglas iris is also a gorgeous plant you can see on walks in the spring around Marin. So beautiful. So, this is a picture, a classic picture of Marin, right, out near the coast. And this would be the coastal sage scrub. And this is our look. This is California. And what we often have a tendency to do, and there's typically nothing wrong with it, but we want to embellish, right? And we're so fortunate that we can grow anything where we live because the climate is just so sublime here that we sort of decide, well, let's color it up. Let's put some more in. Let's do more. We'll add some things here, right? And so we add some things, whether it's in our garden or whatever. And there's nothing wrong. I don't dislike these plants or anything like that. It's just the thing to bear in mind is that sometimes when we take native plants out and we put other plants in, we're taking away a little bit from the environment sometimes. All of those creatures that co-evolved and so forth, they have a preference. And so it's just something to bear in mind. We want to extend our native environment into our gardens to help what's called a corridor for life, or you'll see this expression wildlife corridors. And that just means that we want to give all of these creatures as much opportunity to, you know, move about the cabin to as possible, to give them the food, the water, and the shelter that they need to exist. So native gardens are beautiful and protect our biodiversity. And here's just another little, what I like to refer to as horticultural eye candy, little smattering of some native plants. As you can see, you can also just do, you know, green palettes, or it's not like everything is, you know, has to be a blooming plant, but there's just so many beautiful choices. So the question is, can we really make a difference? When we put plants into our garden, when we borrow, you know, some of the plants that grow naturally in our environment, and we add them to our landscapes, can it really make a difference? And the answer is yes, it really can. And there are people who actually study this. And what I'd like to do now is show you a video. This is from a longer talk. You'll see somebody's going to be just delivering this little presentation in this video. His name is Dr. Doug Talimay. He is a professor back east in Delaware, and he's written, gosh, over 80 research papers, written a bunch of books, and he's a wealth of knowledge. And when you'll see when this video starts, you'll think, why are we talking about, you know, caterpillars? And, you know, but it all comes together, and you'll see how what a difference native plants can make. So let me go ahead and start that. And please, if you can't hear this, please put it in the chat, and we will be sure to, Sariana will come back on, and we will be sure to address that. Here we go.
Summary of it today. So Dr. Talimay, let me turn it over to you now.
Okay, thanks, Kathy. Yeah, this will be the Cliff Notes version of what we talked about last week. We're talking about restoring the little things that run the world, and those are insects. Why they matter, what we can do to save them. We really have two choices in this world. We can create landscapes in which nature thrives, and this is an excellent example. I believe it's Kathy's garden. Or we can create landscapes that are ecologically dead. I see an awful lot of that where I live here in the East. The first option is going to sustain us, but the second one will not. So to restore nature, we have to restore the specialized relationships that are nature, because that's what it's comprised of. And likewise, if we want to restore insects, we have to restore the specialized relationships that sustain them. And that is a lot of specialized relationships. We need to do that because there are so many animals that depend on the specialized relationships that insects have with plants. And this is just one of them. This is the chestnut-backed chickadee, one of the chickadees in California. And a lot of people think of them as seed eaters because that's what they're doing during the wintertime. They certainly do eat seeds. But when it comes time to reproduce, they can't feed their young seeds. Young chickadees cannot eat seeds, so they switch to insects, and most of those insects are caterpillars. And it turns out that the chickadees are not exceptions. Most birds are rearing their young on insects, and most of those insects are caterpillars. And that's because caterpillars are essential to most of the food webs that we have out there, because they transfer more energy from plants to other organisms than any other type of plant eaters. So we need caterpillars, not just for birds, but for almost everything else. They are not optional parts of our food webs. They are essential. How many caterpillars do we need? How many does it take to make a clutch of chickadees, for example? And keep in mind, chickadees are a tiny bird, about 1/3 of an ounce. Well, to make a Carolina chickadee, it's 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars, just to the point where they leave the nest, and then they continue to eat caterpillars afterwards. A similar sized bird, your Wilson's warbler, brought 4,000 caterpillars to the nest in just 5 days. So most birds are feeding their young thousands and thousands of caterpillars every day. As a matter of fact, 96% of all terrestrial birds are rearing their young on insects. And again, most of those insects are caterpillars. So no caterpillars, no insects, no baby birds. A bit of an exaggeration, but not much. Which means we have to create landscapes that are capable of producing the diversity and abundance of insects that we're talking about here. again, particularly caterpillars. So how do we do that? Well, we have to consider the specialized relationships between insects and plants if we want to have those insects. The reason most of the insects are specialized on particular plant lineages is because plants don't want to be eaten. They want to protect their tissues from insects. So they have loaded them with nasty tasting compounds, secondary metabolic compounds that make those leaves either bitter or downright toxic. And it's a really effective defense that keeps most of the insects of the world from eating most of the plants of the world, which is why it's green out there. It's not because there are no insects out there that want to eat the plants. It's because most of the insects that are out there cannot eat most plants. But we do know that insects eat plants. So how do they do that? Well, this is where the specialization comes in. About 90% of the insects that eat plants can only eat particular plants. They can only eat the plants that they have shared a long period of evolutionary history with, during which they have developed specialized adaptations that allow them to get around those chemical defenses. They developed enzymes and behavioral adaptations and life history adaptations that allow them to eat these plants without dying. Monarch butterfly is a perfect example. We all know it as a specialist on milkweeds, and milkweeds, of course, are toxic plants. They're filled with cardiac glycosides and sticky latex sap. But the bright side of specialization is that the monarch now has the ability to get around those defenses and eat milkweeds successfully. There is a downside to specialization, though, and that is that now that's all monarchs can eat. They're so specialized in milkweeds that they haven't spent any time developing the adaptations to eat anything else. So we have 2,137 native plant genera in North America. Got a lot of non-native plants in there too. And monarchs can only eat one, the Asclepias. So if you take Asclepias out of the landscape, you're going to lose your monarchs. That's the result. And of course, California is in very bad shape now with their monarchs. They've declined 99% since 1976 because of the loss of milkweeds. And there's a lot of reasons for the losses. You've had droughts, you've had fires, but habitat destruction is simply removing the milkweeds is certainly a large one. Now, it's not just birds that need these insects that need these caterpillars. It turns out that most of the creatures out there are tied into insect food webs in one way or another. So all spiders need insects, other insects need insects. Our frogs, our toads, our amphibians all eat insects. So do our lizards, so do our bats, so do our rodents and our skunks and our possums and our raccoons. And a lot of things we don't think of as insectivores rely on insects as well. Like our foxes, the red fox, 25% of its diet is insects. 23% of a black bear's diet is insects. So it doesn't matter how big you are, you still need insects. And even if you don't eat insects, you need insects. This is a sharp-shinned hawk. It's a bird predator. And of course, it needs insects indirectly because the birds it's eating needed insects to become birds. Same thing with our snakes. This is a garter snake. It's eating frogs and toads, but the frogs and toads needed insects to become snake food. So a world without insects is a world without biological diversity. And the renowned E.O. Wilson told us way back in 1987 that insects are the little things that run the world. And if we were to lose them, we would lose our flowering plants, 90% of them anyway, which would drastically change energy flow through terrestrial habitats. And that would collapse the food webs that support our animals, our amphibians, our reptiles, our birds, and our mammals. The biosphere would rot as opposed to having insect decomposers rapidly turn over nutrients. You'd only have fungus and bacteria left. And humans, of course, would not survive any of those changes. So insects aren't optional. They're absolutely essential. But we have ignored Wilson's warnings. And that's why we have headlines like this: the insect apocalypse is here. What does it mean for the rest of life on Earth? Well, EO told us what it means, and it's not good. Washington Post says that the UN report suspects that 1 million species will face extinction in the next 20 years. And most of that million species are insects. And they're getting it. Humans will suffer. And by the way, that's the projection, but it's not an option. We cannot lose 1 million species in the next 20 years. So we have to do something about it. Causes of insect declines include misuse and overuse of pesticides, that omnipresent habitat loss, certainly the profligate use of non-native ornamentals that do not support our insects because they haven't had the ability to evolve those adaptations to the non-native ornamentals. Invasive species, so many of our ornamentals have escaped and now they're the primary invasive species in our countryside. Security lights, roadside mortality, climate change. There is some good news here, and that is if I move climate change out of there, the first 6 causes of insect declines are easily reversed, and they're easily reversed by individuals. So there is hope. What's happening to the insectivores that are out there? Well, the ones we care about are birds. They're our charismatic megafauna these days. And we now have 3 billion fewer breeding birds than we had just 45 years ago, with 432 species of North American birds now considered to be at risk of extinction. Not good, not good news. So I'm proposing that our only viable option is to learn how to live in ecological harmony with the natural world that sustained us. In other words, learn how to live sustainably with the natural world that sustained us. Living unsustainably doesn't last very long. How do we do that? Well, we have to put the right plants back into our landscapes. Which plants would they be? One of the things we've learned in our lab recently is that all plants are not created equal in supporting food webs. And it's not just native versus non-native. There's only 5% of our native plants that are making about 75% of the food that drives food webs. And I've called those keystone plants. So I want to emphasize this is one of the most important points of the talk, and that is there are huge differences among native plants and their ability to support food webs. So we want to use those most powerful ones. So for example, oaks in California support 270 species of caterpillars. Eucalyptus only supports 5. So, you know, you love your eucalyptus, but it's not a very productive tree in that regard. Your native prunus support 246 species of caterpillars. Zelkova supports none. Xianothus, your lilac, 93 species. The talk has, this is a very handy graph that Mike made. The green bars are native plants that are used often in homeowner landscapes. The red bars are non-native plants that are used, and on the y-axis there is the number of moths and butterflies that each one of those plant lineages supports. So obviously the green ones are a whole lot better in terms of driving food webs than these red ones. And these first 2 bars, that's what I would call keystone species. They're much better than the other green bars. So we want to make sure that these guys are in our landscapes. Where do we find out what these plants are? If you live any place else in California, you could go to Native Plant Finder, the National Wildlife Federation, and put in your zip code, and a ranked list of woody and non-native plant, or woody and herbaceous plants would pop up for your county. It doesn't work real well in California because you have huge counties with several biomes in each one. Fortunately, the Native Plant Society has created a tool called CalScape, which is much better than this tool, and I wish every state had a CalScape. Where you can actually put in your exact address and it will tell you the plants that are appropriate for your area. Very, very powerful tool. Another important issue here is that there is room for compromise. And this comes from the research that my recent PhD student, Desiree Narango, did with chickadees in the suburbs of Washington, DC. She compared chickadee reproductive success in areas that were dominated by native plants and areas dominated by introduced plants. And this is all in suburbia, by the way. And without spending the time to go over her results, I will tell you that the primary result is that if you have 70% or more native plant biomass in your yard, you can have sustainable chickadee or bird breeding populations, which means you can have up to 30% of your landscape non-native plants, as long as they are not invasive. So you can have the most beautiful plant that you absolutely need without destroying the entire food web. If you have these powerhouse plants that comprise about 70% of the landscape. And to me, that's good news, because if my message was you cannot have any non-native plants, very few people would be looking at it. So what we need to do is rebuild the Earth's carrying capacity, its ability to support life. And that comes from the amount of plants that are in a given area. So we have to put the plants back. We as humans go around and just kind of take plants out all the time, replace it with concrete and other things, lawn. And then the lower 48 ends up looking like this. So where are we going to do this? We want to do it everywhere, but we cannot ignore privately owned land. About 78% of the entire country is privately owned. 86% of the East is privately owned. So we have to use private properties because if we ignore them, our conservation areas will be too small and too isolated in order to function properly. We've gotten ourselves into this mess because we have thought of plants only as decorations, because they are decorations. But for 100 years, we went to the nursery and we bought things based on aesthetics without any thought to the ecological value that those plants need to start performing where we live. And when we landscape with plants only as decorations, then you're talking about ecological destruction. This is a pretty landscape, but it is not a functioning ecosystem. What we can do is pick pretty plants that are native and do supply all of the ecosystem services that we need to start having. They need to be delivered from functioning ecosystems right in human-dominated landscapes. And when we add function to the criteria that we use when we select plants, then landscaping equals ecological restoration. And this is 21st century landscaping. We've done 20th century landscaping, and we're now in the 6th grade extinction. So I would like to give this a try and try to turn that around. I want to end by talking briefly about a book that E.O. wrote, E.O. Wilson, 2016, called Half Earth, where he said that if we want to preserve life on the planet, and I presume we all do, we need to preserve ecosystem function on at least half of the planet. And he talked about the science that supports that. Well, a lot of people want to do that, but they're scratching their heads. How can this possibly be? Half of the planet, the terrestrial planet Earth, is now in agriculture, and 7.8 billion people with all the infrastructure stuffed in the other half. So how can we have ecosystem function there? Well, I think we can, but we need a new approach to conservation. The old approach was to we had this notion that humans and nature cannot exist. We have to toss that notion, because coexisting with functioning nature, with functioning ecosystems now is our only option. So that puts the ball squarely into our court. As property owners, as people who live in cities and can help manage nearby parks and preserves, we have the power, and we certainly have the responsibility to fix dead landscapes like this. None of us are going to be able to fix it alone, but we can fix it if we all work together. And that was my message last week.
Okay. So that is where we will end that. So that kind of ties back to some of the things I was introducing earlier, but I think that Dr. Talimay does an excellent job of tying it all together. So let's see if I can go forward here. There we go. So I'm going to just review a couple of the plants that he has on his keystone list that he talks about. And we'll talk a little bit about what they are, how to care for them, just a short introduction. And then I'll provide some resources so that you can get all the information you want about these. And there's just a smattering of those keystone plants. And of course, they bloom in different times and so forth, but what a gorgeous group of plants. So we'll start with the mighty oak. They're just unbelievable trees. In fact, Dr. Talimay just wrote his latest book is called The Nature of Oaks, which is a lovely book and chock full of great information. But so we'll talk quickly about some of the benefits that oak trees provide. If you have one on your property, you are just so fortunate. So biodiversity is off the charts. Oak woodlands are among the most biodiverse ecosystems in California. Habitats, they're visited by hundreds of insects and birds and animals. They provide food for more moths and butterflies than any other plant. They help mitigate climate change because they're hardwood. Their size and their hardwood help sequester carbon. They help clean the air. And again, because of their size and so forth, they absorb significant quantities of airborne pollutants. They also help clean our water because they absorb the pesticides and fertilizers and other contaminants, other chemicals that run off into soil that sink down. And so that helps keep our drinking water clean, which is we certainly want. They help with erosion control. These large tree canopies that oak trees have, and they, that have the dropped leaves underneath them, that helps prevent soil from eroding because it buffers the impact of rainfall. It enriches the soil. Soil underneath oak canopies is incredibly rich and just chock full of living things. And this also increases its ability, the soil's ability for carbon storage. And of course, all the other benefits that we love, the shade, the shelter, increased property values, food, fuel, and of course, recreational activities. So they're just tremendous trees. And I love the fact that they all start with these as tiny little acorns. So it's just so beautiful. So a couple of quick notes in case you have oak trees at your home or on your landscape. A couple of precautions when gardening near or under oaks. And these are all things basically not to do, right? Do not disturb the roots, right? If you change the grade or if you compact the soil by parking cars or different things under oaks, that definitely can have a negative impact on a beautiful big oak tree. Don't remove the dropped leaves. There are so many microorganisms that are underneath there, helping things decompose and so forth, that it helps protect the roots from disease. Do not irrigate in summer an established oak tree. This is unfortunately, this is something that happens in, say, new developments, that builders will build around a beautiful grove of oak trees. And then we come in and like that photo I showed you earlier slide where we want to kind of doll it up. We'll do all sorts of things under an oak, and that is often their demise. So we want to try and avoid that. Don't want to fertilize oaks necessarily. It can stimulate excessive leaf growth, and that can encourage pests. So we want to try and avoid that. And mature oaks typically don't need much or any pruning. Have to prune evergreen oaks very judiciously and only in dry weather. So these trees are absolute treasures, and we want to take best care of them we can. Then another plant on his keystone list are our native prunus, the Prunus ilicifolia. Oh, this reminds me, I want to mention one thing. You'll notice that I have the botanical name as well as the common names on all these plants. And it's not because I know us nerdy plant people, it's not because we like to speak Latin. It's really, I'll just give you this little tip. If you do go into a nursery or if you do place a plant order or whatever, I highly recommend that you try and use the botanical name. And that's because every plant has one botanical name, one scientific name, but many plants have multiple common names. And so that can create confusion. And so you want to be sure that what you're ordering is what you're going to get. So anyway, our native cherry, one of them, Prunus ilicifolia, is a beautiful evergreen shrub. It can grow up to 30 feet tall, but it's easily kept smaller if you need to. Makes an excellent hedge, has these really showy white flowers in spring. It is teeming with bees and other flying critters, and just so beautiful. Then in the fall, it gets these little darker purple red cherries that the birds treasure. So it is just an outstanding plant for attracting beneficial insects and butterflies. Drought tolerant, it resists oak root fungus, which is a common problem. And it is, this one is native to the Channel Islands. So great plant. The Ribes sanguineum glutinosum, this is our winter currant. There are different native currants. They're beautiful shrubs. In fact, many of these are blooming right now. We're just wrapping up. They tend to bloom in late winter, early spring, some of these, usually in late winter. 5 foot tall, usually, very showy pink flowers. Hummingbirds cannot resist. And then the birds relish the seeds when they dry up. This one likes a little bit of dappled light. I have it underneath the dappled light of an oak tree, actually, and it's kind of out on the edge of the canopy of an oak tree, and it's seems happy there. And it's just an absolutely beautiful plant. Xianothus is another plant that's blooming now, and we'll be seeing those within the next, throughout spring. They are absolutely stunning when in bloom. I mean, what could be more beautiful than this, that color? There are many cultivars from 2-inch little mats to, trees 15 feet or taller. This plant too makes a great hedge or a knockout spring specimen or ground cover. They like sun, they like very lean, well-drained soil and little or no summer water. Once they're established, they're very drought tolerant. And they're a very important food source for bees and butterflies and other beneficial insects. And they're just a beautiful, beautiful plant, easy to grow. Here's an example of one that's a ground cover, centennial, and another one that grows, I want to say 5 or so feet tall, called Cyanothis concha. And then, as you can see, here's a very large one or two that is growing here called Ray Hartman. And often these are pruned up into little standard trees, with a single tree leader and then a beautiful evergreen canopy that turns a beautiful color every spring. Then there are the Manzanitas. These are evergreen shrubs. And again, these are there are all sorts of different ones. 2-inch ground covers to 20-foot trees. These bloom in winter, typically. They always have these little urn-shaped, beautiful flowers and gorgeous bark, right? You've seen the Manzanitas probably out on walks, that kind of shiny, really super smooth red or cinnamony color. So beautiful. They too can make nice hedges or specimens or ground covers. Many are drought tolerant once they're established, and they can live for a very long time. This is especially a very important plant for bees. We always tend to think of honeybees, but there are like 1,600 native bees in California. It's incredible. At any rate, they live a little bit differently than honeybees, but at any rate, this is one of the first plants that they look to when they come out to, look for a snack, right, in winter. So we need these plants in our environment to sustain them. And here again are examples of Manzanitas in 3 different sizes. Howard McMinn is a very common, this is easily found in nurseries, beautiful dark bark, and then these lovely flowers in late winter, so pretty. And there's a ground cover called Uva Ursi. It stays very tight to the ground. And here's a taller one, I think grows around 4 feet tall, John Dorley. But again, there are just so many Manzanitas. And all of our sages, or salvia is the scientific name, so easy and prolific and fragrant, just absolutely gorgeous plants. Many of these bloom in summer, which is nice, late spring or summer, some of them into fall. Many of them are drought tolerant. Most are deer resistant, which is a nice bonus for those who have deer roaming around their gardens. But many have really high quality nectar, and that's why the hummingbirds just cannot stay away. They just absolutely love them, as well as the butterflies and the bees and everybody else. Great plants. And there's a little smattering of some of our native salvia. This one down here in the center bottom is Salvia Apiana, the white sage, has incredibly pungent, fragrant leaves, the foliage. And it's what the Native Americans used for smudge sticks when they had, for ceremonies and so forth. They're absolutely beautiful plant. So just a great group of plants. And then there's our California fuchsias, or Epilobium. Another name you'll see listed for this is Zauschneria. That was the old name. Now it's Epilobium, but they're still, both names are used. I've seen both names still used. Bees and hummingbirds cannot get enough of this plant. They are just so fantastic. One of my favorite little stories is in my garden, I have 2 plants, probably 20, 30 feet away. One of them is one of these California fuchsia with its gray foliage and very bright red orange tubular flowers. And about 20 feet away, I have this other plant that is also equally as beautiful, also with gray foliage, tubular reddish orange flowers. And it's a non-native, and that one gets a few hummingbirds and so forth. They come by and visit, and that's always great. It's right near my patio, so I enjoy it. The native plant, my native Epilobium, blooming at the same time often, is covered with bees and hummingbirds. And, it amazes me that, how do these creatures know the difference? Somehow they do. That coevolution really counts for something. So anyway, that's that. Here's a smattering of some of our wonderful Epilobium. So that's definitely a plant to check out. So quick note on caring for natives. Again, like the oaks, often less is more. Don't use soil amendments. Most prefer lean native soil with nothing added. Now, I will add, this is a common question, right? Oh, but my soil is heavy clay and I can't pound into it and all this. And I get that, believe me. There are some, native purists who really feel like you should never put anything, even compost or anything in your soil. You can decide how you want to manage that. Many people have grown natives and put some soil in the ground and have not had problems. But you can also just get native soil, sort of like clean fill. If you're looking for soil at the nursery, sometimes there's products called like clean fill, and that without a lot of things put in there, and that can help. You can sort of berm up on top of existing soil with soil like that, and that could help. So I know that's a common issue, so I'm just throwing it out there. Do not want to add fertilizer with native plants. They don't need it, they don't want it, and they can create problems. Don't want to overwater them. You want to, when you first plant a native plant, you want to put it in and water it regularly and deeply and really soak it when you first plant it. And don't let that root ball dry out. You really want to get it soaked in. This is why we often recommend planting in the fall, native plants in the fall, because when the rain comes, hopefully in winter, it'll help get them established. So, so just a word to the wise there. Don't want to use pesticides. Chances are they're not going to need anything. And we want the plant to use its own natural defenses, sort of like what Dr. Talimay was talking about with the monarchs, right? You will definitely see increase in birds and caterpillars and so forth if you grow these plants. And I will just throw out to please don't overdo it with deadheading. When the flower dries, is past its prettiest point, sometimes it's nice to leave it on the plant and let the birds take care of that for you. So it's a little snack for them. So I have this a quick video on how to plant a native plant, and this is actually to tell you the truth, how to plant any plant. It's just I think it's 3 or 4 minutes, and it's a good reminder. So I'm just going to play this quickly. There you go.
Now I'm going to show you how to plant a native plant. The first thing to remember is you do not want to dig the hole too deep. You want to dig the hole slightly less deep than the soil that's in the container. So for this baby St. Catherine's lace buckwheat, the soil in the container is this high. So I'm going to dig a hole slightly less deep, only that high in total. Then the next step is you want to dig it twice as wide as the container. And you want to sort of score the sides of the hole so that the roots can grab hold. You do not want to make a smooth-sided hole. It's looking just as if the plant crown is sitting slightly higher than the soil level. That's perfect to make a little plant island with a moat around it and then a berm around the moat to keep the water in. And I'm going to pour in 3 gallons of water and wait for it to completely drain out before I plant the plant. And then you also want to water the plant in the pot thoroughly before you plant it as well. Here we are a half an hour later with the hole that we filled with water. it has completely drained. So we know that we have fast draining soil, and we can plant anything, either a clay adapted plant or a plant that is adapted to fast draining soil. What you want to do is gently put your fingers like this around the stem of the plant and turn it upside down, and then slip the pot off of the plant roots. Now, you can see all of these plant roots that are here on the edge. You don't want to be rough with it. Instead, you want to just gently break it apart so that the roots will spread out into the soil of the hole. So I'm just gently massaging the roots, gently breaking them up. And with most plants, you can do this. There are certain plants that will rebel if you do it and die, like Matilaha poppy. You definitely don't want to do it with Matilaha poppy and island bush poppy. But with most plants, it's just fine to be very gentle. So now I take my other hand, I flip it over, and now I set it in the hole. And I start to fill in the soil, patting it down with my knuckles to get out any air pockets. I'm making the plant be a little plant island surrounded by a moat. And now I make a berm of soil all around the moat to keep the water in. Now we'll do the test. We'll pour the water in. And if I've planted this properly, the plant should be on a little bit of an island sitting above the water that's in the moat. I think another 1/4 inch higher would have been better, just to raise that plant island up just a bit so that there was definitely no water around the stem. But this is what you want to do. Dig the hole slightly less deep than the soil in the container, twice as wide, fill it with water, let the water drain, water the plant in the pot before you plant it, and then plant, and then water once again.
Okay, great. So I imagine for many of you, that was just what you're already doing, but the key there is to plant so that things are, the crown of the plant where the stem meets the roots is just a little higher than the soil line, because you don't want water to gather there. Okay, so a couple of resources. This will all be on the I'm going to provide a resource list for everyone afterwards. So this is so that you can access that, but there are plenty of books and websites, and I'll even add to this so many good resources for native plants. In particular, I want to call out the one that Dr. Talimay mentioned, which is CalScape. This is the website for the California Native Plant Society. And you can literally put your zip code in here, and it will tell you all the plants that are native to your area. So without a doubt, you know that plants that are native to your area are naturally adapted. So it's an incredibly great resource. You can also, on that same website, you can sort by all sorts of things. You'll see, if you go to it, I think it's advanced search, then you can, search by, a plant that's so high and so tall and wide. And if you want fragrance and nurseries where it may be available, if you want evergreen, perennial, whatever, it's an incredible resource. And they have kind of a fun little tool. You can go in and answer a few questions, and then it spits out a little garden plan for you, a collection of plants that you might like. So that's kind of a fun thing to look at too. On the Marin Master Gardener website, we have some plant lists that can be very, very helpful. We do have some easy California native, a list of that. When you go to our website, you'll see there's a menu across the top. If you go to plants, there's a whole section on California native plants. It'll give you some of the information I've covered today. And then there's a plant list that you click on, and it looks like this, but there'll be, of course, a bunch more. And if you click on each of these photos, you can learn all sorts of information about them. There are also lists on our website for planting under or near oak trees. Because those are, as we discussed, we really need to take care of our oaks. And part of that is it's so beneficial to plant things with them that are not going to require a bunch of water and so forth. So there's a list for that. There's another list for plants that can grow under or around redwood trees. That can be an extremely challenging environment, especially in backyard settings. So I'll put those in the resource list afterwards as well. I encourage you to visit the Falklard gardens in San Rafael, the master gardeners. We have a number of gardens there. They're absolutely beautiful. And they've just planted a brand new native garden. So a lot of the plants are babies still right now. But that garden in particular apparently is all plants native to Marin. So plants that were actually native to Marin County. So that is an incredible resource. And I can't wait to watch that as it continues to grow. So then, of course, there are all these wonderful coastal areas we can visit to see all sorts of native plants. And inland areas, how lucky are we to live in such a gorgeous area with such natural beauty around us. Again, I'll have all of this in the resource list at the end. But what I just want to leave you with is to please bring some of that beauty home with you that you see in our beautiful surroundings. And I'm just gonna wrap up here and show you some of the ways I have in my own garden. Here's an example. This is a plant that's under one of my oak trees here on the left. This is a Heuchera. The common name is coral bells. And it's a lovely, easy plant to grow. And these little flower spikes, the butterflies, the hummingbirds really love. As you can see over here on the right, this plant, this is a Xianothus in front and some native grasses back here. And this plant behind it is a sort of a cultivar that they made off of Heucheras. You can get Heucheras in any leaf color on the face of the earth, which is great. And there's also our native one. I just wanted to show the difference. This one in the middle here just shows, poppies that come up in the spring. If you plant poppies once by just throwing out seeds in the fall, you will have poppies forever. I assure you, they'll come back year after year. And here, this is an example of our native buckwheats. This is a low growing one. There's some wonderful native buckwheats. The scientific name is Eriogonum. They're really important for our butterflies, just an absolutely wonderful plant. This is one of our native salvias. This is Salvia Spafacier, a native sage. And the common name is Hummingbird Sage. And you can see why the hummingbirds just love these tubular flowers. So great plant, fragrant foliage, really quite a beauty when it's blooming. Then our yarrow. And there's a low growing, easy plant to grow. This the white blooming plant here. As you can see, I have these non-native plants around. I'm not a native purist. But they mix well with other plants that, like low water, all the things we're trying to do in our gardens, right? And finally, this is a Cyanothis that's on a kind of over an alley next to my house. Looks like I should have done a better job of pruning this, right? Looks like it needs a little haircut on the top, but it's just such a beautiful bloomer in spring. And then this is one of the Manzanitas. This is in my garden. It's kind of a small tree. This one happens to be called Dr. Hurd. Arctostaphylos is the word for Manzanita, Dr. Hurd. It's an absolutely beautiful plant and has little white flowers in winter that the bees absolutely love and need. And that wraps it up. And I want to just wrap up by saying there's a lot of ways to get in touch with the master gardeners. If you hold your phone up, if you're interested in subscribing to our free quarterly e-newsletter, I happen to be the co-editor of that publication. Just hold your phone up like you're going to take a photo, but don't take a photo. It's something will open it up. If you just put your email address in there, you'll automatically be added to the list. And you'll hear about Master Gardener events and talks, and of course, other educational information. So that's what I have.
Right, thank you so much, Marie. And we do have quite a few questions in the chat. I do want to say one thing. You've shared that video about how to plant a native plant, and then you said, I know you all probably know how to do this. I learned things. That video helped me.
Good, that's great. Oh,
I know there's a lot of Master gardeners on our attendees list, and I've told everybody, all of them are Master gardeners. I know I'm not a gardener. I do not have a green thumb. I'm like, oh, that's how you pull the plant out of the container. Okay, now I
love
know.
it. I love it. Good. Well, that's great. That's good to hear.
Hair in my mouth. Okay, so I'm going to start at the beginning of the chat. There's also some questions in the Q&A, so we'll go back and forth a little bit. It's very sweet. A lot of people had questions and you answered it right afterwards. So I'm just going to read their questions if you want to say anything else about that. Janet says, I live in Terra Linda where it is hot and dry and the ground is dense clay, almost like cement. It's different than, say, Mill Valley. What are some native plants that would do well there? And then like a minute later, she says, oh, well, it seems you'll talk about that. So
right. Well, yeah, I really encourage you to, you could go to CalScape, to that website, the California Native Plant website, put in your zip code or your address or whatever, and it'll show you plants that are native to your area. So you could start there. And like I touched on it, this is a common issue. We all have this in our gardens, right? And so, you know, I will say amending with some compost can loosen that up, which is fine. You can ask around at nurseries to see, I mean, at yards, you know, the different stone yards and so forth that we have in supply yards, for if they have clean backfill products that could help, you know, get us back to as much of the native soil as we can. And I might add, there are plants that work with clay soil. I actually have a list of those on our website as well. So I will include all of these in the resource list.
great. And then Aurora said, and she asked this in the Q&A and actually answered it while you were talking, Marie. She asked to please put the link in to the 15-minute video. You shared the longer video here in the chat. Everyone, Marie's going to send me that link to the video that will be in my follow-up email along with the link to this recording and the link to that video if you want to rewatch that video. So we're covered there. Janet asks, how can I hire someone to help me figure out what or how to plant natives? She's feeling very new at this.
Yeah, well, you know, you can just search on finding people who specialize in native plants. And I think there are some designers who tend to use them. So that's the best I can tell you. Some of the water districts like MMWD, they have landscapers who have special training in low water plants, I believe, called Quell. And so maybe some of them have some extra training in with some native plants. I'm not really sure. But I think even if you probably just search online for Marin designers, you might find some who specialize in native plants.
Thank you. So this is another one where someone asked a question, then you answered it right away. Claudia says, excellent video. Thank you. Can you make that chart of native trees / plants available as a handout? It was hard to read and you did it.
Yeah.
Like right after she asked that. So
no problem, but I do love that chart too. I just think it's so great the way it shows, especially the difference between the native and the non-native plants, right? You know, the difference. So yeah, so that'll be part of the video. So you can stop it and watch it.
And then she was the next comment and she said, fantastic program. Thank you, all caps.
Oh.
You're going to get a lot of those, by the way. I've already been seeing them coming. Aurora asks, it says, so good. I know several groups who need to see and would most likely be interested in seeing this program.
Right.
When you get that recording link, you can send it to everybody you want. Like,
and you can also contact the master gardeners because I'd love to do this for other groups.
Yeah,
please contact me. Yeah, or the master gardeners. Yeah.
Definitely, it's so great having multiple Marin master gardener programs out and around. Another person has, could we get plant lists? Will you post this video or slides from the day? So the video will be posted. I don't know about plant lists. Will that be included in your resource, or are there just too many?
No, I'd be happy to. The ones that I mentioned, we have, I have a list of California native plants that are good, easy to start with plants. I have one for under oaks. I have one for under redwood trees. And there was another one I was just thinking of. Oh yeah, the one I do have a plant list for clay soil. There are a lot of natives on that list. So I will be happy to call those out separately, but I encourage everyone to go to the Marin Master Gardener website. And again, under plants, there are all sorts of plant lists there. I think you'll find a wealth of information. If they're all if you click on the photos, you can learn all sorts of other facts and see more photos of those same plants. So there's a lot of information on there.
So Alexandra says, this is fantastic. Are there any of these plants that can grow well in pots?
Yes, and in fact, that is a perfect lead-in. One of my colleagues, Bonnie Marks, and I think Mamie, anyway, I know Bonnie Marks is doing a talk on the 26th, a week from this Saturday, and it's all about natives in containers. And this too is a new presentation, so it should be really great. But yes, there definitely are some natives that can be grown in containers.
Our next question is kind of a series of questions. Would these also thrive in shade or minimal sun? Would any of these plants thrive in shade or minimal sun? That's one question. And then the second question is, what about soil under large oak trees?
Soil under large oak trees, I think we discussed that a little bit, when I got to the oak tree part, but you want to try and keep it just as rich as it is naturally. When those leaves drop, those of you who have oak trees, you notice, especially like around here, there are a lot of coast live oaks and they drop their little leaves all year. And it really is important to leave that there for the health of the tree. But, and again, I will include a plant list in the resource list that's on the Marin Master Gardener website, specifically for planting under and around oak trees.
And then our next question is there anything we can plant under deciduous oaks without harming the oak? Did I pronounce that right? Deciduous?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, both for deciduous and evergreen oaks. The plant list that I'll provide will be very handy.
Okay. And then are there any good options for ground cover instead of grass that can be used like a grassy area?
Yes, well, that's really funny. This is a great question, because another presentation I do is how to remove your lawn and what to put there instead. So I have all sorts of, I have lots of suggestions for that. And if you go to the Marin Master Gardener YouTube channel, which I will include in the resource list, there's recording of that presentation. I just did it a week or two ago. And there are lots of options that use a fraction of the water that a lawn uses. And that too is also on our website. So I'll tie it all in. I'll bring it all together for the resource list.
We just keep piling on the list your list of resources.
Yeah, right. It's getting longer and longer. Yeah.
So the next comment is, thanks for this resource. What is one important thing that you would like new native gardeners to consider before starting this process?
Oh, what a great question. The first thing.
There are a lot of great questions today.
Yeah. Well, I would say the one thing I would really like people to know, so many things are coming to mind, but if you're planting some native plants, to really get them established by watering and keeping a layer of mulch around the plants to help the soil. But then do not overwater in summer. That is a common error, right? We're so used to having our sprinklers and our drip systems and so forth. And most native plants, not all, but many native plants are going to turn their nose up at that in summertime. So, and this is, of course, is a selling point, but we're just so used to putting water on plants, a lot of water. So that's what I would say, is to get them established and then be careful overwatering in summer.
Okay. Are there times when we can ask questions about the plants and characteristics when visiting the Falklard Gardens?
Oh, another great question. I will find out the time. It used to be that they invited anyone who wanted to come and help or ask questions to care for the gardens, but also just to come and, ask questions. Was Saturday, like the first Saturday of the month or something, and I'll find out if that's happening again. I'm not sure because of, the COVID and so forth, what's happened with that. So yeah, there is a wealth of information and really great people at Falkirk who can answer questions. So I will find out about the time and put it in the resource list. So I'll let you know.
And are all of these plants okay to irrigate using only drip?
Yeah. So there's the $64,000 question. Once some of these plants are established, you do not want to be putting, let's put it this way. I would avoid, 10 minutes of water 3 times a week, type of thing. What's the rule of thumb? For many native plants, once they get established, after a year or two, they may just need water, or you can maybe just give them water like once a month, once every 2 weeks, something like that. My favorite story about this is, Xianothus, one of the plants we talked about. I planted a little mini hedge of it near my house. And I waited until the fall, until I knew it was, and rain was in the forecast. This was a few years back. And it was really going to be raining and raining. So I thought, great, I'll put in my Xianothus. And I put it in, I planted it. It rained like crazy for about a week, I remember, and I never watered it again. This was an experiment for me to see how it would perform. And it was absolutely, it was incredible. Every spring, it just lit up with cobalt blue flowers. Now, I'm not recommending this because if we don't get that incredible rain to get something really in, and again, not all plants want it this dry in summer, not even natives, but just getting them established and then really, backing off once that happens, it's really critical. So I'm just throwing that out there.
Right, thank you. This kind of leads into the next question. If planting a native in fall and there's a wet winter, how much watering the next spring and summer?
Yeah, right. There you go. Yeah,
It magically happened.
Don't take my story as and actually, there's a place on our website, I will include it, where we talk about a recommended watering regimen for native plants, sort of a rule of thumb. And it's escaping me right now, but I will include that. So it'll provide a little bit more guidelines.
Okay, great. Thank you. Are there any native succulents?
Yes, there are some gorgeous native succulents. Yes. There are some beautiful ones. So again, you could go right into CalScape and just click, yes, I want to know about succulents, and I just want to know them for California or for my county or whatever, and you'll see them. There's some beautiful ones. In fact, there's one of them, a Dudleya anyway, that grows on the coast. That I don't know if you've seen in the news, people are coming and stealing it because they can sell it for all this money in different, even foreign places, and people are getting arrested and all this kind of craziness. But oh yeah, there's some knockout California native succulents.
All right, thank you. So we have a couple of thank yous, and thank you so much coming up. The next question, do you ever call the poppy that you are not supposed to massage the roots apart when planting?
In the video, yeah, it's Matillaha poppy, which is the scientific name is Romnea coulteri. This is a plant, you may have seen it around. It tends to be pretty tall, 4, maybe 5 feet tall. And at the top, it has these white, gorgeous, wide open flowers with big yellow centers. Beautiful plant, but it can be incredibly, it'll take off and take over if it's in an environment that's really that it loves, and that's sandy soil. If you have sandy soil, which many of us don't, but if you have really sandy soil and you put in a Matillaha poppy, it can just It can go under a house, come up the other side, you know, I mean, it can just really spread its roots. So it's probably not a plant that you want to, you know, this is something if you have room for something to roam, Matillaha poppy is great. If not, use with caution.
Great. So it is almost 2:20, so I'm going to try and get through all of the questions.
Yeah.
Is there such a thing as a non-ecologically dead or low to not water lawn? Are fescue lawn mixes actually native / ecologically friendly, or just a sales point?
Again, I encourage you to go on and look at my lawn alternative presentations. And I do have a plant list. There are some lawn alternatives that you can, you know, just water once or twice a year, and you can walk on them, and that they're going to use very little water. I'll throw out just a couple since this question came up, you know, like people are using clover as a lawn alternative, right? This is the stuff we used to try and take out of our lawns. Just throw out, you know, you can seed an area, encourages bees and puts nitrogen in the soil, all sorts of benefits. And maybe you can mow it once or twice a year. It's not going to need much water at all, right? There are so many options now. So I'll leave it at that, but I'll also put it in the resource list.
The next question is, the flat front lot I am trying to populate slopes slightly toward the street. Should I create berms of soil to create more of a water retention friendly space?
Well, that's interesting. This is something we're getting into. That's a great question. You know, one of our goals in our gardens is to try and keep water on site, right? We want to, when it rains, we hope, or even with irrigation, anything, we want the water to sink down and slow down and spread out, right? Because we want to recharge our groundwater. It's a very important thing. And so anything you can do to keep water on site, yeah, would be great. Sometimes you can do that with rocks, right? Put rocks up almost like like little mini retaining walls or whatever, you know, low guys, and get that to soak down. So yeah, I mean, if you can do that, great. And also when you bring in soil and you kind of berm up like that, you can also it can fix a myriad of soil problems because you're kind of berming up. So for what it's worth.
All right. So we have another thank you in the chat. And then this is very sweet from Carolyn. I've seen so many native plant talks and have much hope for this one. I have been blown away. So helpful and inspirational. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. That's so kind. That's very kind. Thank you.
So we have a few more questions. Who would be a good resource for soil check or test? They're not sure if their soil is too tight because of clay or if they have good nutrient content. Also not sure if their soil is also a thick, matted, dense set of roots. What do I do in these cases? And you mentioned a few minutes ago to keep leaves drop by live oaks as is, but would that work with drip irrigation?
What you keep the leaves dropped. Oh, you mean you're afraid it shouldn't clog the.
Yeah, she's saying clogging with holes.
Clogging with holes. It shouldn't. Well, first of all, you wouldn't be using much irrigation right around. Hopefully, right around too much around an oak tree. But usually, I don't think there's a problem with it clogging. Most the irrigation things have. I don't think that should be a big. That should be a problem. I do want to go back to the soil test question though.
Yeah.
And we do have a part of that on the Master Gardener website where we speak to exactly getting a soil test. So another thing to include. I'll just put our website on there, right? And it's a really great section that a colleague of mine wrote on not only just dealing with problems in the garden, but how to test soil and so forth. It's really great. So and how to send them off. So I'll include that.
And we've kept the whole let's stay in touch slide up. The Marin Master Gardener's website is foremost on this. So you guys all should have the link. This has been an amazing resource. This has completely inspired her to plant only natives from now on. Thank you so much. Really terrific. Great presentation. Thank you all very much. Very informative. So
Oh, that is so heartwarming. I have to say that just, thank you. That's really great.
yeah. So now that was everything in the chat. The chat's closed. I'm going to the Q&A
Okay.
chat now. So one person has asked, do you provide sample planting plans that we can derive inspiration from?
Planting plans. You mean, well, by planting plans, I think of plant palettes. So when when I'm helping people with their gardens and we're coming up with a group of plants, that's what I'm thinking of. We don't necessarily have that on the website because there's so many other factors that go into it. But the plant list hopefully will help with that from the site. So I hope that answers your question.
And then Joan, hi Joan. Thank you for this event. How fire prone are these plants? I'd like to avoid anything that is particularly flammable.
That's also a great question. So what the University of California, what we tell people is, and again, we have a whole section of this on our website, Fire Smart Landscaping, is that all plants burn. And that is the honest to goodness truth. All plants do burn. And so it really isn't what you plant, it's where you plant it and how you take care of it, right? And so, one of the most, just as an example, one of the most critical areas is the 5 feet around your house, right, from around the perimeter of your home. And so anything planted within that, whether it's a native or an exotic, no matter what it is suspect, right? Because we know that is a critical area for creating defensible space. And so there are other advice and guidelines that you will find about fire smart landscaping, such as, again, no matter what you're planting, natives or otherwise, you want to try and incorporate some stone or other non-combustible materials to help stop the path of a fire, these types of things. But again, I want to add that it has nothing to do with what the plants are. It's just where they are, where they're planted, and how they're maintained.
The next question is that this person struggles with figuring out what looks good together. Any ideas?
Yeah, this is again when I help people with their gardens, from, again, this is on not the master's gardener, without my master gardener hat on, but on a, helping them with little garden design projects. One of the, we talk about things like using plants that have contrasting foliage and different textures and sizes and so forth. It's kind of getting into a design thing, not necessarily just about natives, but it's plants in general. So that's a pretty broad answer. I'm sorry, I can't be more specific.
And then how to keep gophers from plants. They seem to love the California poppy.
Oh, I know, gophers. The biggest, when it comes to gophers, traps are usually the what's recommended for managing them. And of course, when you're planting things, to put them in gopher baskets.
Okay. If I plant a native in spring, should they be watered in the summer in the first year?
In the first year, it's probably fine. Yeah, you know what I mean? This is, again, you're still in that period of time when you're really getting it established. It's after it's established that you want to kind of just let it do its thing and then be careful about the watering. Okay,
there's 2 more questions in the Q&A, and that's it because it's almost 2:30, everybody. Yeah. So Barbara has said that they save their water from washing their clothes. Is this okay? I'm assuming she means, is this okay to use on their plants?
Yeah, you would want to, I know there's a special soap that you can use in washing machines. It's for people who use like landscape, there's, what is it? The laundry to landscape gray water systems that folks use. There are certain soaps that are better than others, things you want to avoid. So I would look into that.
Okay, and then this will be the last question. I do see that there are some more, but I will have a response for the rest of the questions. Last questions from Gail. What are the best plants to plant in a shady area?
Oh, there are just so many. There are so many to choose from. Again, I would just go on to, the Calscape site is really great. They're going to be able to, you can sort by that, that you have, half sun or shady situation, and you'll get all sorts of hits for that. You'll see all sorts of examples.
All right, so again, I want to thank everybody for coming to our program today. A lot of the questions, the answers seem to be on the Marin Master Gardener's wonderful website. Marie will send me a list of resources and I will hopefully send it to you really soon. If you have any more questions for the Marin Master Gardeners, I do suggest emailing them. Their email is right on this slide here. And I am every Marin Master Gardener I've worked with has been so knowledgeable and so helpful. So if there are more questions, I'm sure they can help you out there at the help desk.
Right. Wonderful.
Okay. All right, I'm going to stop recording. So bye to everybody who's watching the recording.
Thank you.